Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mark Bittman, Thomas Harttung, Chellie Pingree, Ricardo Salvador, Seth Watkins.
See, we've lost about 30% of the traffic beaters have left, which is too bad because this is a terrific panel and you're not going to hear very much from me. I'll start. I'll introduce my panelists from the far end. Thomas Harttung is a Dane who has a farm near Copenhagen that is probably responsible for the world's biggest CSA, 45 or 50,000 families. He'll talk about that a little bit. Ricardo Salvador is a friend of mine, an agronomist, runs the Food and Environment Department at the Union of Concerned Scientists. Chellie Pingree is also a friend of mine, a US Congresswoman from the great state of Maine, and an organic farmer in Maine. And Seth Watkins is a new friend of mine, a farmer in Iowa who raises corn and soybeans and feeds them to his cattle. I think before we ask the question, who will farm and how, it would be nice if each of you expanded a little bit on my introductions, because you know yourselves better than I do. Why don't we start with you, Seth? Just a few words about your farm and what you do.
I guess I wanted to thank all of you for having me here first, because ultimately you're my customers and everyone has concerns and things they want to ask about agriculture, and I'm glad I had the chance to answer them. Our farm is a conventional cow-calf operation in southwest Iowa. We raise about 600 mama cows. Those calves are then finished in our own feedlot. And we've really made a focus more on taking care of the environment than we have on our cow herd. And that really started in about 1998. Mother Nature really got my attention in terms of a blizzard. And I realized that even though I was trying to do everything that, as farmers, we have the industry pushing us and we have the universities pushing us and we get all this information and sometimes it needs filtered. And we had this blizzard and we happened to be doing what the university said of calving in February and March. And I watched the cows go through that and I worked my tail off and I watched what just didn't quite feel right to me. And I decided afterwards that I wasn't going to worry about what they said so much as about focusing on what seemed like a good quality of life for my family and for my livestock. So we changed to April calving season for a little nicer weather for the cows. But we also switched around to really focusing on quality, and that was quality water and quality land. I guess the best way I could describe it, I'm talking to people in business, it's kind of like the D-Maine theory. When you focus on quality, costs go down over time and quality improves. And when you focus on costs, quality decreases and costs go up. And I see some parallels in agriculture sometimes. So long story short, my bottom line improved. And then as that improved, we were able to see better wildlife. We then added a hunting business. And as our wildlife improved, we became even more protective of our natural resources and then expanded into offering lead credits for companies through land mitigation. So,
thanks, Seth. Yeah. Very succinct. You surprised me. Chellie, I don't know if you want to talk as a farmer or we definitely want you to talk as a member of Congress, but you may want to talk as a farmer also.
Great. Well, I will. I'll smush them together and try to be brief. So I was actually telling Seth, my grandparents were Scandinavian immigrants, and they started out in Iowa, moved to Minnesota, and I somehow, as a teenager, ended up in the state of Maine, and it was the early 1970s when there was sort of a back to the land, early sustainability and agriculture movement. I was lucky enough to go to College of the Atlantic, where Elliott Coleman was one of my teachers, so I got a good background in organic farming and started out as a small farmer with a couple of milking cows and eggs and vegetables that I sold to people because I was active in my community, I ended up running for local office. So I was on the tax assessor board, then I was the school board chair, as everyone in a small town always is. Ended up in the state legislature. So I have now been in public office since the 1990s and farming on and off ever since then. I continue now to have an organic farm. I'm lucky enough to be doing this again. And we also run an inn and a restaurant. So we have the added opportunities to see what people want to eat in the restaurant, what they buy at the farm stand. And all these things I'm able to bring to bear as a member, first of the Agriculture Committee, and currently I serve on the Agricultural Appropriations Committee in Congress, where I've served for 6 years. So for me, it's just a great combination, both being able to go back to a farm when I'm not in Congress to kind of get my feet on the ground again, and also to be able to bring some of those experiences to the policy-making side, whether it's Food Safety Modernization Act and what's going to work and not work, or what this market looks like, or the challenges of organic, natural, all the other issues that we face every day. So I feel like I have a very lucky life.
Ricardo, you come to this from the science side, like so few of us do. I wonder if you might just tell us how you got here and what you're feeling about it.
Sure. So that is really important, because if I had any shred of decency, given what the topic of this panel is, I'd refuse to be up here with these qualified people. But I don't have much decency, so I accepted. And the reason is that I can speak to it from the little bit that I know about agronomy. And maybe it would be of interest to describe why I am an agronomist, which is because on a rare occasion I paid attention to fatherly advice. And this had to do with the fact that I'm from Mexico, and when I was growing up, I experienced a great deal of poverty. My father's family was a self-provisioning Native American family, and when I finished high school, I announced that I was done with studying. I saw no value in it, and I was going to go back to the family village. And my father, in a very comprehending, thoughtful way, very moderate voice, said, I understand you want to help your family, but think about this. They're farmers. If you go back there right now with what you know and what you can do, you're going to be another mouth to feed. And if you really want to help, why don't you learn something so that you can take that when you go back? Why don't you be a doctor? Why don't you be a lawyer? Why don't you be an agronomist? So I was a teenager, and I looked at how long it would take to study each of those careers. And even though I was mistaken, I thought that the career in agronomy would be the shortest one. And so that's how I ended up being an agronomist during the heyday of the Green Revolution in Mexico. It was a very prestigious thing to be an agronomist, who at that time was a rural social change agent, really solving the problems of rural people. And for reasons that I won't go into in detail, I ended up in the United States legally. You're wondering about that, I know. And agronomy in the United States was such a shock to me. You don't study any of the things that I just mentioned. You had to learn about the Krebs cycle and calculus and all sorts of things that I wasn't prepared for. But they gave me an entree into 30 years working as an agronomist, teaching Midwestern farmers about growing corn and soybean, which has given me a great deal of insight into the topics that we're about to discuss. So that's how I ended up being an agronomist.
Thomas, you have probably the most exotic stories, but let's hear it.
Well, thank you, first of all, for the opportunity to be part of such a very inspiring gathering of people as we've been over these last 2 days. As a young organic farmer in Denmark in the mid-90s, I was in those days mainly a cereal and seed farmer. I heard a presentation by Michael Abelman, who was one of the CSA pioneers in California. And it blew my mind that there was this idea of connecting households with farms very directly. And we set up a similar pilot scheme on our farm. And it was, at the time, it was the laughing stock of not only my colleagues but my neighbors, but sort of just pretty much of everybody. But it captured in a funny way, the zeitgeist of things. So it had not only attracted its first 100 families that took a share in the harvest, but it also attracted the attention of the media, and suddenly it had national attention. And as Mark was saying, my farm is close to Copenhagen, but Denmark's so small, so everything is close to Copenhagen. Denmark is about the size of New Jersey, so you have to figure it's a small country of only just over 5 million inhabitants. And we set it up just for 100 shares, maybe 200 shares as a non-profit. But as it took off, we realized that if we were to make use of the full potential of this idea, we would have to professionalize it. So we ended up incorporating it. We ended up taking in venture capital. So we did all sorts of naughty things that organic farmers don't normally do. But we actually survived the trajectory of growing very rapidly. And if you fast forward to today, it's a healthy business that's based on the farm. It's hosted by the farm, but it's its own company. It has working partners, so it's not a mom and pop business anymore. It serves, as Mark said, 50,000 customers all over Denmark with organic produce. And it's I usually say it's not really a CSA anymore. It's more like an ASC, because it's an agriculture-supported community, because we are really front-end driven. It's more about this community of inspired citizens in Copenhagen that's the driving force of it, rather than the agricultural side. And I think part of the secret of taking the CSA model to scale is to really understand the everyday life of urban people and how to actually be helpful in making their life work. In many ways, a weekly vegetable box is its own worst enemy, because people invariably fail at eating everything that's in the box. So what we've done is to morph it into something that is more like a meal solutions thing. So we are offering people all the ingredients for their evening meal in their Sunday to Thursday nightmare of eating properly with their children. So it's very much driven towards making those meals work using organic ingredients, but it's more community-centric than farm-centric.
Okay, we come to the key question, which is the name of the panel. Who will farm and how? And I'm going to stay with you, Thomas, because I know you have some interesting thoughts about this. So why don't you lead this off? Who will farm?
Well, to me, the simple answer is that all of us will be farming 10 to 20 years from now. Everybody will be farming, because the revolution of social media will continue, and the revolution of mobile technology will create entirely new communities of attention. So social media has very much been about human interactions, but why not create interactions with the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom? So, animals have faces too, and even wheat has a head. So we could be doing FaceTime with the animals and with the plant world. And I think that to really understand the cutting edge of where we're going, that would be if we could harness that energy of social media, then we can totally transform the way we think about agriculture, and it will very much be a collaborative of everybody.
So you don't mean literally everybody will farm?
Well, yes, actually, I do mean everybody.
Good. Well,
I think that if you look at the tractors of today is actually a very, very, very coarse instrument. It doesn't have a lot of on-the-ground intelligence. It's just a huge fossil fuel-driven contraption. It's a bit like the mainframe of the 60s. If you think of your handheld device as something which is much more nimble, much more clever, much more dynamic, much more personal. I think that we will be farming in the mindset of little handheld devices in the future, not large tractors. If you let that idea sink in, then you'll say, well, if we begin to develop capabilities that distribute knowledge and distribute understanding and connectivity between the people, then we could be actually micro-farming our own little thing in communities, rather than thinking of agriculture as something very aggregated. So I think that the technology has the opportunity to democratize the practice of agriculture in a very profound way.
Do you have some vision of me owning or controlling a half an acre or an acre of farmland somewhere and managing it without actually going there or occasionally going there?
Yeah. I think that the opportunities are extraordinary if we pursue that, and I think it could change very much the. It is also about a rehumanization of agriculture. It is about creating communities of interest in this field, rather than the process that has taken place over the last 40, 50 years, which is that people have left agriculture. I think we can create an extraordinary, vibrant community by allowing people to communicate.
So a closer relationship between me and the food that is grown for me, and I'm sort of growing it.
You're involved in the process, yeah.
Right. Ricardo, where do you think things are going?
Well, agriculture is the most powerful way in which we use the planet, literally, in terms of utilizing the majority of the world's fresh water supplies, the majority of the land when you include grazing as well as crop production. And the world is a large and complicated place. And we may have a divergence of opinion depending on whether you're advocating an ideal or whether you have described a literal vision of the future. We have become primarily urban, and while there is great potential for supplementing the food supply through urban production, the fact is that the majority of us will not be producing a significant proportion of our food supply, and there are vast extensions of land on the planet which are amenable to large-scale production. So I see a great diversity in terms of scale of production, from very large extension in those places that have that tractability to doing the small-scale urban agriculture when that is the resource that you have closest at hand to supplement your food supply, to everything in between. So it would be a mistake, I think, to appeal or to wish for any homogeneity in any way in which we live, including the way in which we produce our food. It will make us more resilient to have that sort of diversity, particularly when we match our production methods to the resources and the scale at which we need to operate. But that is subject to a number of different constraints. There are things at the moment that need dramatic improvement, because in a way you could say this is what we have at the moment. And so, for instance, for me to enjoy this cup of coffee, there needs to be dramatic improvement in terms of how large-scale coffee production works, in terms of fair trade, and in terms of treatment of its employees, its labor, in terms of production practices and impact on the environment, the standard issues that attend agricultural practice. So then when you go to the people that will be able to implement that, one thing that's very clear to me is that it's not productive to think of people having different capacities. I'll just assume that everyone has the capacity to pursue an intent. I think this question really goes to the most commonplace, the literal interpretation, and that is, what is farming? What do you think that you're doing when you go about farming? And you mentioned a couple of contrasts yesterday, Mark. One is that if we believe that farming is an economic abstraction, and there is no ligature between that economic abstraction if we practice it in terms of income, capital investment, and so on, and its ties to the fundamental resources that make it possible, water, soil, nutrients, energy, and so on, it is possible, again, as Seth had said, to operate in such a way in which you increase capital and apparent well-being when what in fact you're doing is denuding all of the key fundamental resources that humanity has, both in the present and in the future. And and that sets up a competition of resources. It's not a future anyone wants to be a part of. So I think that the people that will conduct these sorts of activities in the future will have a capacity to understand that what they're really doing is managing the real capital of this planet, the real wealth of this planet, which is the soil, the nutrients, the energy, in such a way that we regenerate them, not dissipate them, and that what we're really after is to maximize human well-being, both of the farmers that are in that activity and in those who benefit from the activity of those farmers. So it is very different from the self-conception that what this is another type of industrial activity that is an economic abstraction measured by who ends up with the largest pile of money.
Does that mean that farms are going to get smaller on average? There are going to be more farmers, or it just means we're going to have more humanely managed farms, more rationally managed farms?
I think, as you and others have said, production is not a limiting factor. Therefore, if we're going to address questions such as are there going to be more farms or less farms, it has to do with what the mode of gaining a living that is available and makes the most sense in different parts of the world will end up being. If it is dignified to go into small-scale production and there are markets for that and there's support for people engaged in those activities, then I can see that there will be incentive for doing that sort of thing. By the way, one of the things that I definitely want to avoid in a discussion like this, which happens often, is that you just romanticize, this reified farmer. And there, just as in farming and any other activity, there are people who don't do it well. But what I am assuming here is that capacity is there for people that are going to be successful, and I make that comment by way of saying that there are skills that all human beings can apply to the enterprise that gives them the most reward and the most incentive. But these folks that we're talking about here, farmers as a class, they do share something in common. If you think about all of the difficulties that we've been discussing over the past 24 hours here, some of them real conundrums. You talk about the government policies that are involved, we talk about managing human resources, we talk about where science is taking us. What these folks have in common is that they're underneath all of that, and they're actually trying to resolve all of those things while making a living while they're doing that. Resourceful, creative, again, those who are successful, so I'm not romanticizing here. Resourceful, creative, trying new things, not doing the same thing twice. For me, the key thing is this question, what do you actually think that you're doing? And my hope is that in the future, we have an agreement that what farmers are doing and what we support them to do is to keep viable the planetary life systems in such a way that all of us have a chance at equal well-being. That's a farming goal. That's an agricultural goal.
Chellie, you're in the unique position of, we'd like to say making policy, but at least having a hand in making policy and running a small farm. So what do you see of the future of those and their interaction, I guess?
So, I don't have the crystal ball that tells me exactly what the future will look like, and I have a few thoughts of what's happening right now that I think predicts some of the future. But overall, I would say one of the nice things about being in a room with such diversity of dialogue is that I think the future will also continue to be a diversity of farms. I think we'll continue to have big farms. I think we'll continue to have some vertically integrated farms and some small farms. I think there is lots of room for growth. And I think things like urban agriculture, whether it's, the rooftops in New York or, Will Allen in Milwaukee doing aquaponics and greenhouses. I mean, there's just going to be a lot more of that as the opportunities open up, and it gives both urban areas a chance to have food that's grown locally, but also those communities to have a little touch with the farmer, which increasingly I think we think is important. So I see, I see a future that's going to get diverse. I think we're going to stop living quite so much in our silos, so to speak. And having served on the Agriculture Committee as well as Agricultural Appropriations, I hear it in my colleagues' voices. 20 years ago, when I was a state legislator, you couldn't get a room with the organic dairy farmers and the conventional dairy farmers together to talk about policy. The organic dairy farmers would sort of be left outside as the marginalized, who are they anyway? And today, when I have a meeting with the dairy farmers in my district, I can't tell them apart. I don't know who's who in the room because they're just getting whatever market is good and they're happy to have it. And that's true on the Agriculture Committee. It used to be, you couldn't bring up a topic of organic and not sort of be marginalized in the room. And I hear many of my very stern colleagues from big Midwestern states who say, I've got a huge beef producing district, but I've also got this guy with a couple of acres set aside to grow tomatoes for the local restaurants, and that's a great income source for him. So people increasingly in policymaking roles are understanding even their own farmers want to have access to this diversity. And while I'll say we've got a long way to go in the Farm Bill to really recognize that, pieces of the Farm Bill, we wrote a title called the Local Food, Farms, and Jobs Act, and we tried to put pieces in there that recognized more opportunities for urban agriculture, more support for farmers markets, things to help people with SNAP benefits so that they could buy more at farmers markets to give more opportunities to the farmers to sell them, school lunch program things, and then all the things like value-added producer grants and ways to support farmers who want to do just a little bit more, not just have a couple dairy goats, but also make cheese out of that and have a little loan or a grant to go ahead and do that. Now, I think it always sounds like I'm a Luddite when I try to use history to make my point, but I don't care, I'm going to do it anyway. And I think some of my best examples, which is a nice thing, they come from the state I represent. So Maine, and we're here in New England, Maine is one of those states that used to be a thriving agricultural state. And as our country shifted and more production went to the Midwest, and California, Florida, we saw some huge changes. And it's hard for most of us to imagine, but prior to the Civil War, Maine had more representatives to Congress than Florida and California combined. We now have 2, we're lucky to have 2, and California has 53. So it gives you a sense of how much the world has changed, but Maine fed the Union Army. I mean, we were the breadbasket for that, however you feel about the Union Army. But the fact is, that's when we were in our heyday. So it reminds me that at that moment in time, we had the agricultural capabilities, we had the infrastructure to do it, and we could feed way beyond our state. Now, we've gone through a huge decline, and part of it's been the competition of other states that could sort of outraise and undersell us. But today, now we're in the middle of this agricultural revolution that's pretty significant. In the last 5 years, agricultural sales in our state have gone up 25%. 50% of that is organic. The average age of our farmer in Maine is going down. And something like 29% of the farmers in our state, the new farmers, are women, where it's about 17% around the country. I might be off on one of those numbers. But it's a huge change. The number of farms under production are going up. So this says to me, there weren't some huge policy changes that made this happen, but it was a state that had land that had kind of been ignored. So entrance wasn't as difficult as if you were trying to buy a few acres in Iowa or Colorado or someplace where there were higher land values or more established farming. And we have had an infrastructure, interestingly enough, that goes back to the 1970s, which is kind of when I first got into farming. And we have the largest organic association per capita in the country, MOFCA, Maine Organic Farmers, that runs an apprenticeship program and a journey person program. So if you're a young person who wants to get a start on somebody else's farm, you can get a little training, you can learn a little bit more, and maybe make a deal with that farmer, or you eventually can buy your own few acres, but you know a little bit about what you're doing. Maine Farmland Trust also helps farmers to pass their farms onto somebody else or make some of those arrangements. So a lot of the things that we're trying to change in public policy, more technical assistance, easier access, more availability of capital, was there in a teeny way in our state. But what's happened is we're one of those states that's really turning around a lot of the things that we care about, and all of a sudden there's these great markets, not only in our own state where you can't really even fill the market demand, but we're close to the transportation links to all these other places. So I think a lot of who will farm will be the pent-up demand of young people and existing farmers who want to keep their farms and their kids who want to stay on the farm, who are now presented with this amazing growing market and huge opportunities. And I just say, we can argue this point, but I just happen to live in one of those places where it's already happening. So to me, it's a fact.
Maine is the future.
There is a lot of the future in Maine. And when I talk to my colleagues around the country, they may have it at the same level, but they're all saying, oh yeah, there's CSAs opening up in our state, and the farmers markets are really popular, and even our traditional farmers are looking for this. And the one little last piece I want to say is that we always get to this point in the dialogue where somebody says, oh, that's just, your fancy tourists who who come in, and rich people who want to buy this food. And I just have to say, okay, enough of that. My state is 30th in per capita income. I just happen to live in a state where people really like to eat. And they remember not that long ago that their grandmother had a farm, or their uncle had a farm, or they bought from the farm stand down the road. So whatever they've got, they take to the grocery store or the farm stand, or they plant in their backyard, or they use their SNAP benefits and get to the farmer's market and they buy it. And I'm done with the argument that this only is going to have a market in elitist places. When Walmart makes a presentation that they know their customers want this, when it's in Target, every grocery store we have in our state has a local food section. That's what people want, and this is only going to grow. So there.
So Seth, if Maine is the future, Iowa is certainly the present, where's it going? Who's going to farm in Iowa, and how are they going to do it?
Well, I came at this from a little different direction. I'll give you a little background. It's been very special for me to come here and meet you and interact as a farmer, but there's always another reason that this was special to me as well. My father was an illustrator for Cooper Studios in the 50s, and my parents actually lived in Tarrytown. 3 of my oldest sisters were baptized at the Dutch Reformed Church, and I came along kind of on the tail end, so I never got to experience any of this. So being able to reconnect here has been very special, and then Dad's career took him to San Francisco, and he was with BBD&O as an art director. But my mother always wanted to get back to the farm, and I'm very grateful that she did. But when I was given the question, I tried to look at it from how my father would. And the answer I had was that I believe the next generation of farmers will evolve from the demands and expectations of the next generation of consumers. And I'm glad this was mentioned earlier. I don't like the idea of living in a world with 9 billion people. I don't, that's too many people, and I'm glad that there's ideas of empowering women and helping people in the developing world so maybe someone can get an education, and that's the best family planning I know. So what I thought about, though, is if our planet did have to sustain 9 billion people, I guess the most important thing to me is that those 9 billion would be connected to the land and have a relationship with nature, that we'd have a planet of 9 billion stewards. Stewards first and producers and consumers second. But the more I think about the concept of how agriculture and my vision of agriculture is, the idea of 9 billion consumers and producers is kind of like a parallel to a zombie apocalypse. And we do make our own future, and I think that leadership rests on us. I'm excited because in Iowa, I am seeing my friends and my peers. We're watching what's happening to our small communities. We're watching us, they're kind of drying up, and we don't like that. We love those small towns, and that's who we are. And the attitude has gone from one of, I can do it all, to one of, we are a part of this, and let's find some new ideas, some new ways to farm. So I'm optimistic. I think that once again it goes back to what we focus on, and what people as consumers demand is going to be what really drives it. I can try to raise different crops, but if I'm too far away or I don't have a distribution system to deliver that crop, then it's not a good option for me.
Thank you. So I had some questions, but actually they're no better than the questions that are coming in from people in the audience. Thomas, I think I'll direct this one to you, and it is, how do you see urban farms developing in the next 5 to 10 years, and what's their role?
Urban and peri-urban farms are an incredibly important part of what I'm trying to say. It is that if we can experiment with this idea of a very different way of sharing the land and start off around the metropolises of the north, we also actually are able to, in a much better way, to discuss this with the future metropolises in the south. It's a bit like, at Rio in 1972, that we said they couldn't cut down their rainforest, and they would ask, well, you cut down your rainforest 1,000 years ago. Why do do we not get to do what you did? So the Europeans at least had to put their house in order, and we are not much more aware of how we look after biodiversity or what's left of it in Europe. And this is a bit the same thing. If we are to discuss the relevance of smallholder agriculture in the Southern Hemisphere as a sound way forward, well, we actually have to seriously investigate whether it would be meaningful for us to pursue that idea. And Mark, you spoke very strongly yesterday about the eradication of poverty in this country. And to me, the eradication of poverty is the abstract term. The real term is sharing the resource. And I think that if we shared the land resource in a far more profound way among each other, very interesting things would begin to happen. And we have this infatuation with efficiency of the industrial system, but as you said, and also Michael Pollan said, it's actually a fallacy to say that it's incredibly efficient. If you look at how productive, intensive horticulture is, with a strong element of human interaction, is actually, from a calorie point of view, a far more interesting option than continuing the present state of affairs.
Thank you. Chellie, you talked a little bit about new women farmers, and the question comes from the audience, but I was going to ask it too, is how do we get more women involved in farming? And I suppose while you're at it, how do we get more young people involved? How do we find more farmers, make more farmers?
So again, I would say, in a state like Maine, but I think it's reflected in many, many places around the country, there is an enormous interest on the part of young people to get engaged in farming. Urban farming, rural agriculture, and all the barriers that we've been talking about the whole time. Cost of getting access to the land, technical assistance, training, and then once you get there, figuring out how to actually make a living at it. I mean, this is not an easy business, as everybody here knows, and the smaller you are, sometimes the more challenging it is. You don't make a lot of money off of vegetables. So there are a lot of factors that go into this, and I think part of what's happening in the success of Maine is you have a lot of very innovative young people with an enormous amount of desire, and we have good technical assistance in our state. But I can't tell you how many small farms, not only, we were talking about this earlier, I mean, you also open your farm to hunting, which is a great economic opportunity for you. There are vegetable farmers who also sell flowers and have a flower CSA, or they open the barn and rent it to weddings, or, I mean, I don't want to diminish the importance of farming, but I know that the people who lived on my farm 100 years ago took in boarders to make sure they could pay the bills. I know that my grandmother did the same thing and took in sewing. So let's not pretend that the small farmer doesn't often have to do a lot of things, or one of them works off the farm. So anyway, see, I don't think there is a dearth of demand. I think there's a lot of barriers to entry. And so the more opportunities that are there, and the more we break them down, and the more we change our policy, not just to support sort of some of the big things we've been worrying about today, the commodities for the big farms, and the differential in cost that makes it very cheap to buy things that are grown somewhere else and very expensive to grow them where you are, and just sort of more assistance at a federal level of some of the things that make it easier, technical assistance, access to the land, easier access to capital. I think there are great opportunities. I think if you ask the people here who are in academics and anyone who has a Department of Sustainable Agriculture, they're getting a lot of applicants today. And so there are a lot of young people who want to do this. The hard part is the economics of it once you get out. And the fact that we have so many success stories in my tiny little state tells me that there are creative, innovative success stories everywhere else. And the last thing I'll say, having been a young farmer 40 years ago myself, which I was 3, we were good at it, and we had a lot of new organic ideas, and we had a lot of great books, and Helen and Scott Nearing, Living the Good Life, and Rodale books, and all the other things that we use. But today, I'm just amazed when I walk onto a young person's farm and the technical tools they have and the way they use the internet and the way they organize their CSA and how quickly through Facebook they can tell their customers what's available that day. I mean, there are a lot of tools, and this is a generation that is incredibly well poised to use them, or to figure out those value-added products that turns your elderberries into an elderberry elixir that is worth an enormous amount of money and you sell around the world on the internet. I mean, it's just amazing to me. So I think this is one of those places where just give people a few more tools and get out of the way, and we will be wildly impressed at how much production there is.
We have 10 minutes and I have 10 questions. So every question has to be, like every answer has to be bing, bang, boom now. Chellie, just a follow-up, sort of special roles or special entry points for women? Is it different? Do we just say young farmers or do we say young women farmers?
Honestly, women just seem to be signing up in bigger numbers. You know, I have a fair number of farm employees, and the majority of them are women, and we hear from them all the time. So I'm not sure this is one of those things where we have to open access. We just have to make sure we don't put barriers in the way once they get there.
Seth, new farming in a state that's got lots and lots of big tracts of land, is it possible to get in?
It is possible. Our biggest limiting factor is, once again, we're losing population in the rural areas. If you're an hour from Des Moines or an hour from the Cedar Valley, there's all, you know, I think we're the fourth leading state in the nation for farmers markets. So there are opportunities, but we've got to get more people back. I'm going to advocate for rural migration since I've got you all here today. You know?
One question, this comes from me, but one thing I keep saying is, I mean, land is expensive in Iowa, we know that. Land is no longer cheap in Maine. Should we be chasing people, guiding people to Alabama? Should we be saying to people, there are some big states in the South with good soil, lots of water, pretty good climate, and it's not expensive down there. Should we be saying to people who want to farm, you should be thinking about the Southeast?
I think that's an option, but I think about our own farm and a lot of farms, especially in our region of Iowa, there's areas that would be better served for other crops. And I think, you know, we've got, within the operation we've got 250 acres that is land that's been fenced off to protect ponds and streams from the cattle. But there's 200 acres that we could do something else with. It'd be awesome to get a young person back to work with me, but I want to make sure they've got a market for it, or a distribution system to move that crop to the coast. You know, you guys live hundreds of miles away from some of the best farmland in the world, and that's confusing to me, but I understand why also.
We consider Iowa local, I think, don't we? Ricardo, here's a question. When will food system reform emerge as a critical campaign issue in Washington? I know this is something you think about a lot.
I hope it's immediate. I think that all of us here need to make certain that whenever we're engaged in the electoral process, that we just make it a thing, that we make it an issue, that just as we ask about local jobs or we ask about what the candidate is going to do around other issues that we care about in terms of economic activity, we ask the food question. We ask questions about what they have in mind in terms of how they're going to support farming as well as the food system and public well-being related to that. Some of this is up to us to make sure that this gets into the dialogue. And we have to make sure, absolutely, that candidates feel like they're not prepared and not competent to go before the folks that they want to vote for them until they have something very good to say about these sorts of issues. So I'm not putting this off into the future. I think the very next election or the very next local food policy council or the next city council meeting, these sorts of questions need to be raised. If there are issues now, why should we put the policy response off into the future?
Is there, are people prepared at all in schools these days for a career in farming? Is there anything that would guide people into farming, even in farm states? I'm opening this to everyone.
Iowa State's Sustainable Agriculture School is excellent. My dream is to go within our school, maybe get 2 or 3 school districts together. And I think this is where you build stewards. And I'd love to get our districts to buy a farm But you think about this concept, it's not just to learn how to farm, it's a living classroom. And you think about all the things that go with that, the risk management, the banking, the finance, the planning, learning that you can do everything right and have it still fail isn't a bad lesson either. I talk to my friends in manufacturing, they want more innovative people. Innovation was born on farms. So we've talked about how we find opportunities for businesses, and maybe I'm pitching something different, but that's something I'd like to see us do in every community, we already talked about the school gardens or greenhouses. I just want to take it a step further and have a school farm with a vocational school on it and tailor it to your region. In our region, it'd be technology and trucking are our best jobs, so that's what ours would be, but it might be something else. But take it one step further and make sure that the kids on that farm raise the food for their school and they serve it to their classmates so they understand where it comes from. That's my dream.
That's really good.
I'm involved in a charity in Denmark which has pioneered the school garden concept in our country, but it has an added element in it because it also has a strong gastronomic element. So it's called the Garden to Bellies project, and it's actually teaching children not just to grow the food, but actually also to cook it. And they bring back the ingredients so they can repeat what they learn to their parents. And it's actually now becoming part of the entire curriculum in Denmark. So we are integrating very much that. And you may think that what I started out saying was absolutely crazy, that everybody should be farming. But how many of you know apps like Farmville? Do you know how many users there are on Farmville?
Millions.
It's been downloaded by 650 million people across the planet. So people are willing to play farming. And imagine if that became a virtual Farmville. Suddenly we could be in a very different world. So there is something about the way that social media can spread ideas and activities and democratize that could radically change our food system.
I'm going to, rather than run late, I'm going to stop 2 minutes early. No one else should leave if you're thinking about leaving. The next hour is going to be quite fun. But let's thank our panelists here and take a short break.